Good evening, everyone. My name is Ailish Byrne and I am the Tirlán Director of Agribusiness. I hope you're all doing well, despite the inclement weather conditions on farm. Just to put that in context, I saw some statistics earlier from Met Éireann, which showed that the average rainfall in Johnstown Castle during the last 6 months was 148% of the average for that period over the last 5 years. You don't need me or anyone else to tell you about the difficulties you're all experiencing on farm at the moment. There is increased workload pressure and financial stress as cows remain indoors on a lot of farms. On our webinar tonight, Managing Cows Through the Current Weather Challenges, we hope that we can provide you with some support and advice on how best to manage your cows through this critical period post-calving, in setting the cow up for peak milk production and the breeding season. We all know that if we don't feed the cow enough energy in early lactation, she will lose too much body condition and not reach peak milk production. The Tirlán board approved again dairy feed weather support in the form of a €30 rebate on all dairy feed tons delivered on farm between the 15th of March and the 30th of March initially. However, due to the continuing challenging weather conditions, this has now been extended until the 6th of April. Our webinar this evening will be chaired by Shane McElroy with presentations from Brian Hart and Elaine Brady. This will provide you with an update on the current milk supply and milk quality situation on farm, as well as real-life examples of issues that you may be experiencing at the moment and possible solutions. The Tirlán team are joined tonight by Joe Patton from Teagasc. We would like to welcome you, Joe, and thank you for your time tonight. Joe will provide an update on the current grazing situation nationally, rotation targets, as well as some simple points on indoor diets with and without grass. Before I hand over to Shane, I would like to say that we recognise that all farmers are impacted by the current situation. Our agronomy team are working closely with our grain suppliers, and our Beef 2020 team are supporting our dry stock farmers. I would encourage you all to reach out to your Tirlán branch or business manager who are available to provide support and technical advice if needed to help you get through this challenging time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ailish. That is great, and thanks for that intro. Guys, you're all very welcome this evening to our webinar, and we're going to, without further ado, really take you through the various presentations. We're going to keep it as simple as we possibly can and as solutions based. We know there's plenty of challenges out there, and really this evening is all about, we don't need to talk too much about the problem, but we'll just call out where various aspects of the challenges are. And it's right across the country, and we are delighted to have Joe Patton here, who will bring the national perspective as well as the Tirlán view as well. In terms of this evening's webinar, we're also recording the webinar just for the benefit of others who can't make it this evening, and will be able to watch it at a future point in time. Just in terms of, we'd really like to get your questions this evening, and if you've got scenarios on your own farm that you'd like to get further insights onto and how to manage various scenarios that you're facing, throw the question please into the chat function on Teams. So if you're on a phone or if you're on the PC, you'll be able to click on the chat function and just type it in and send it over to us, and it'll come through to us, and we'll do our best to answer as many of those as we can. So look, without further ado, I'll hand over to Joe Patton, who will take us through the update on current feed and fodder issues.
Thanks, Shane. All right. Yeah. So first of all, thanks for the invite to speak. It seems I only ever get rolled out when there's a problem. So there we go. So anyway, but look, just say before I start, I suppose that we've been covered a fair bit of the country over the last week or two, and this is not a localized issue. I think it's obviously a national issue at this stage. Everywhere from basically from County Louth down as far as Cork seems to be affected, and particularly I'd say the southern section of the country nearly even more so. So this is not like a it's not a heavy land issue or a wetland issue. It's a national issue at this stage. So look, I suppose we can take a look, maybe Shane, just at maybe where the figures are on pasture base for the moment. And if there's any sort of good news, I suppose, in all this, we have to sort of look at some positives too. We have to be realistic about what's out there, but the positives, I suppose, relative to other, I suppose, crises we've seen over the last few years is that at least at this stage, there is grass on farms, which is, we all know that, we haven't got to it yet, I suppose, and that's a positive. I think we should be thinking, because in let's say go back to 2018, we had no silage and we had no grass. At least this time there's a bank of feed on farms. We reckon that the average cover nationally is probably in the region of the low 900s. It's actually increased over the last couple of weeks, which it really just says that grass is actually starting to grow. Regrowths are actually quite good on what has been grazed, but obviously we're not taking grass out of the paddocks because of the grazing conditions. So look, you could say that there's, on average, there's the equivalent of about somewhere around 1.5 bale of silage, if you want to look at it that way, equivalent of grass in the paddocks at the moment. So there's actually plenty of grass out there, and that's really reflected that only about 50% of areas grazed, relative to maybe closer to 80% for the same week last year. And maybe something we have to consider, I suppose, that not only do we have to deal with the current weather conditions, but we also have to think about what we do if and when it ever stops raining. 35% of farms have nitrogen out, 65% on pasture base at least have no chemical N out at this stage. So, when things get going, that's something we obviously, the latent ambition is there to get that out, but that's where the figures are at the moment, Shane. So I suppose reflecting that there's pasture cover there, growth rates predicted. I know we've a bit colder in the last couple of days, but in the low 20s, I suppose, is where it's at, and it's the same nationwide, really. So there's, we're later in the year than we think, I suppose. Isn't that it? Like, we're into April nearly now at this stage, and growth rates are sitting in the low 20s, is probably where you'd expect them to be. So look at, obviously, access and grazing conditions are the issue. But I would say, and I think it's important we say this from the outset this evening, that things can change, and hopefully will change relatively quickly. And what I mean by that is, I suppose, when things do change, we're not looking at a situation here where we're saying we need a dry week to solve the problem. Okay, that's we have to be careful about that this could change in a matter of days, and hopefully it will. So like 2 dry days can make a big difference in the situation. And if that happens and we're starting to get a bit of confidence, grass by day, at least until lunchtime, I suppose, as soon as possible after the thing sort of dries a little bit, Shane. And I know some farms are achieving that maybe at the moment. Okay. As we sort of move out, and I'm conscious that we're saying, when will this ever change? But when it does start to maybe pick up, or things improve, or we're starting to pick our way through it, I wouldn't be that worried about the residuals just in the first couple of days. I think we're almost starting again, let's say, with grazing. We sort of get cows back out, get the thing going, and then we're on to, don't worry about the residuals for the first few days, get back on track as best we can, okay? And look, on that, I know things have moved on, and we've most herds are well on with calving at this stage. I would say that, with conditions being difficult, and even at the moment for herds that are continuing to graze, there's a good chunk of animals there at the moment that are calved, maybe over a month at this stage, 6 weeks in a lot of cases. They have a full appetite at this stage, and they're back and almost ready. They are ready to start cycling. They need a push in terms of intake. However, our fresh cows, or the later calving cows, or maybe the more vulnerable cows, may not be fit for that in and out type of a thing. So what we would be saying, and we've seen it work very well over the spring on some herds, keep a fresh cow group going. Something that calves today wouldn't be joining the main group until maybe Monday of next week type of a thing. And that can solve a lot of problems with metabolic issues. So just be kind, I suppose, to the fresher cows in the group, but the main bunch, don't be afraid to separate or let a portion of the herd out, I suppose, as the conditions allow. But the thing is to move, and don't make the decision. Don't make the decision from the yard every morning. Make the decision have a look in the paddocks and see where we're at, because I know we've used up a lot of our dry area, but there is still scope, I think, on a lot of farms to continue if it's dry overhead. Okay. So we'll just move on the slide, lads. Yeah. So look, I suppose one of the issues that is occurring, and we're seeing a bit of it, is, and it's a concern, I would say, on some farms, is basically a collapse of production, or not certainly a collapse, but a lack of drive on when we should be starting to see cows move on. And, you know, a lot of that is really, I suppose, there's two kind of situations occurring there. First, maybe on farms that were a bit tight for silage or had to buy silage, they're now into stuff that they would have bought. The quality is not maybe there. And, you know, so the forage quality, if you're indoors full time, mightn't be brilliant. The second thing possibly contributing to that, Shane, is that if we're in a situation where we're waiting to go, or we're in and out and waiting to go, on a lot of farms, maybe there isn't a very, you know, a response, there isn't a change in concentrate rates, even though the diet has changed in the background. So maybe we're still on the grazing ration in terms of rates, rather than recognizing that we're indoors full time. So I'm just looking at two sort of, you know, two quick diets there. Like the first one, I suppose, is your standard sort of, you know, grass silage, let's say, plus about 5 kilos of your spring grazing ration. That's really only going to support maybe 21 kilos of milk. And certainly with the level of protein in the silage and the level of intake, you may struggle to get much more than 3.1 to 3.15 in protein. And we are seeing that a little bit. So what we are saying is, if there's a situation where you know you're going to be sort of stuck indoors for the next week or so, an adjustment is needed. We would be saying certainly you're probably looking at pushing on concentrate in the parlour up to somewhere between 6 and 7 kilos possibly, but maybe to do something simple like bring in maybe a high fibre straight like hulls or beet pulp in the middle of the day, just to hold the situation together. I don't think we can do much radical surgery on the diet in the short term, because hopefully this thing could change quickly, but maybe something that's, you know, something that's easy to do, I would say, for farmers, maybe hulls or beet pulp or something like that, just to prop up cows. And in that extra bit of feeding should help to push proteins up and milk yields back up to closer where you would expect them to be. Okay, so we just click through there and see for the next situation, I suppose, if we just get that bit of grass by day, and I mean after milking until lunchtime, getting some grass in, you know, as much as we can really with reasonable conditions, we can start pushing. You won't see maybe the change in milk yield will be certainly better than if we're indoors on small amounts of concentrate, but certainly we should see it in the protein percentage. And that's the power of grazed grass, I suppose. We can drive on protein percentages to more normal levels, 340 to 350, in around that 24, 25 kilos of milk, which is where a lot of herds would expect to be. And finally then grass by day. And if we're looking at just click through grass by day with sort of that somewhere between 4 or 5 kilos of concentrate in the short term as cows settle down, that'll support 25 kilos of milk, no problem, and up to 3.6 to 3.7 protein, depending on the genetics. Believe it or not, we was on a couple of farms over the weekend that have managed to keep grass in to that level, even in the bad conditions. I know it's an achievement to do it, and we have seen higher proteins on those farms. We've seen the whole range there, I would say, Shane, from 310 to 350 or 360 protein. Grass in the diet is the major difference on a lot of them, and up or down by a kilo of concentrate here or there might make as big a difference as you might think. But certainly if we're stuck indoors full time, we do have to respond, and it's looking like somewhere between 6 and 7 kilos in the parlour, and maybe a high energy, high fibre feed just to prop up the cows in the middle of the day. It might be something that could work and has worked well in the past for people. Okay, so look, we'll move through there. Yeah, so just to move on. Look, we know this one in terms of condition score at breeding. We want 275 to 3. If that slips, like the reality is, if that slips back, we're going to have less peak milk yield, more non-cycling cows, lower conception rates, right? So that's easy. What does 275 or 3 look like? I suppose we'll just click through to the photo just briefly. And that's kind of where we are as an idea. That's certainly heading towards 3 of a body condition. We'd like to see that in mid-April. Obviously, this April is a challenge. We do need to prop them up to keep that right. So that kind of bit of cover on the tail head, cover on the short ribs, you know, that there is a bit of genuine cover. So rather than just focusing on the number, that's kind of what we're looking at. So we go to the next one maybe just to see where we're at. What's maybe more typical, if we just click through, please.
Yeah, Joe, I'm not sure if you hear me.
Yeah, sorry, Shane.
Just we might have a technical glitch there. I'm not sure that the slides are moving on. not sure if John in the background might be able to just move on the slides. I know they're coming through for yourself and myself, Joe.
Yeah.
And possibly the other presenters, but I don't think they're moving through on the
on
the live webinar. So just
we talk through it then, Shane, if that's what you want. Yeah, that's okay. Sorry. No,
sorry, they are now clicking on. Sorry. So do you know what, John, in the background, if you were to go to that full, if you just go to the full deck there, if you click on once more, please, John.
Yeah.
And not sure, John, if you are hearing me in the background.
Sorry, folks, from what I'm seeing is current conditions.
Yeah, look, we leave it there, lads. I think that's the most important slide, right? If we just leave it there for that one, if you go back there and we just talk through that. So look, that's the main point, really, that we have to react. We have to react with something that's easy to put in. We also have to react with something that's easy to take out. Because we've seen in the past here where people go with very elaborate solutions to wet weather, and the weather changes in the space of 3 or 4 days, and we're left with a pile of feed in the yard that we won't use. We end up using it up. We end up keeping it in to use it up, which is a cost. So my take on it is, guys, that we react with energy. I think the midday high energy straight can be something. We'll have to increase parlour supplementation rates if cows are indoors full time, but you know, and I think this is where the risk is in a lot of this stuff. We could spend a lot of time or a lot of effort trying to set up this ideal indoor diet, and before we know where we are, we should be back out grazing, right? And it's a very reactive situation. So I think I would say we're not trying to achieve perfection in terms of putting in exactly to the milligram of what level of energy we need, or if you like, we should put in something that's safe for the cows, a bit of extra energy, prop them up, but be always thinking that I'm grazing tomorrow. I'm grazing tomorrow. That's where we have to be with it. If we pull up the drawbridge and say I'm done for a week, you know, that sounds like it's easy for me to say where I'm sitting, but believe me, I know the story. I know the story. It's a decision that has to be made every day. And I think if we look at it that way, we might build a bit of hope back into the situation. But we have to react. But as I say, Shane, don't be putting in very elaborate solutions, because I think the thing could change before we ever get a chance to even implement them. Okay, so that'd be my message on the feeding. And just I know we can't see the figure on the body condition, but you know, we just need to be careful on that take a look at the herd, see how we're getting on. If there's signs of them struggling, by all means, we have to just hold them together in terms of supplementation. But if and when it does change, grass allocation and a belly full of grass will solve a lot of problems over the space of a couple of weeks when the time comes, Shane. So look, just in the interest of time, we leave it for questions possibly, because I know there possibly could be, and we might leave it there. Okay.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, sorry now for
No, that's perfect. No problem at all, Joe. And apologies now for having technical issues. Just moving slides on there.
Yeah, no,
we can come back to some of those photos if people would like to see them later on. So guys, I can see what I'm sharing. I'm not sure that you're seeing exactly what I'm sharing, but we'll drive on. So thanks very much for that, Joe, and we will come back to you, no doubt, in the questions and the scenarios that we'd like to tease out later on. Elaine Brady is our nutritionist on the Tirlán team, and Elaine, you might take us through the milk update and some results of the survey that we just carried out in the last couple of days.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Shane. So yeah, we recently sent out a survey to a cohort of our suppliers there yesterday, just to get an idea of what's happening on farm in terms of grazing, silage stocks, and what farmers are doing to manage cows. So these are some of the results that we got. So we know that a majority of the herds have calved on farm, and that these results are very much reflective of what Joe presented earlier. So majority, so over like 50, just over half of those surveyed are grazing whenever they can by day, and that there is a lot sufficient amounts of grass available, which is a positive, as Joe mentioned earlier. However, land is unsuitable for grazing for the majority, particularly with the amount of rain that fell there this week, and around 40% or 37% are saying that it'll take up to a week until that ground is suitable again for grazing. So that means cows are going to be in for another few days, at least until hopefully the rain stops. In terms of concentrated feeding, then so suppliers are making an effort to maintain those milk yields and proteins by feeding a higher rate than they normally would. So on average, the feeding rate is 6 kg. This is 2 kgs above the norm at this time of year, as usually they would be out on grass and feeding 4 kgs rather than the 6. When it comes to silage, 37% have less than 3 weeks of silage remaining on farm, and the rest then have more than three or more weeks of silage, which is also a positive. And next slide, please. So just an overview on what we're seeing in terms of milk volume and constituents. So overall, volumes are down by 11% year to date. And when we compare this to the same week last week to the week in 2023, that's down by 5%. Then when we look at the fats and proteins, so we see the first graph is the weekly average percentage in terms of protein compared to 2023. So the purple line there you can see is continuously dropping over the last few weeks. This naturally does occur as we reach peak milk, but however, it's dropping lower than the 3% into their last week. It was 2.96. So this is an indicator that there is a significant energy deficit in diets. Then when we look at the butterfat percentage, then we can see that it has steadily maintained and slightly increased, but now it's on the way down, and that's an indicator that body nutrition score or body nutrition is being lost. Also reflecting the indoor situation on perhaps poor quality silage and not getting out to grass, and it's starting to decline because we're kind of reaching that stage where majority of the herd is starting to reach that 6-week period where cows are starting to rely on the diet rather than their body reserves. Next slide, please. So just to have a look in terms of milk proteins and financials around that. So milk proteins will increase when feeding does improve. However, it won't recover fully if we're not meeting the cow's requirement. So if we do get to feed or improve feeding by either getting out to grass whenever we can or increasing the supplementation slightly, that kg of protein is worth nearly 80.5 €. So for every percentage, 0.1% that you can increase that protein is worth 0.84 cents per litre. If that increases by 0.2, that's 1.68 cents per litre. So if let's say you have a cow milking and she's producing 25 litres, that's nearly worth 42 cents. So that pays for that extra kg of concentrates that you're feeding, and grass. If you get your cows out by day to grass, that'll then significantly improve that protein percentage. As Joe presented earlier, once grass is introduced, that protein percentage will increase. Then just the financial impacts by missing that milk peak milk yield. So ICBF when we look at the figures there and any of the milk recording data, year to date is showing that cows are underperforming on average by 1.5 kgs of milk per day versus this time last year. So that suggests that a lot of herds won't be or missing peak milk production. And kind of what is that impact on the remaining of the lactation? So if you take that 1.5 kg and missing, this is lower than the normal peak yield, you're losing out on 200 kgs of milk for the remainder of lactation once the remainder of lactation is managed. So you're not reducing more than 2.5% from peak onwards. So if you multiply that out under 100 cow herds, that's could be worth 7,700 euros for 100 cow herd. However, it doesn't take in any fats and proteins within that calculation, so it's just based on the base milk price. So while we are focusing here on terms of milk production and performance, and trying to feed on to make sure that you reach these peaks in proteins, it'll also have a benefit on fertility. As Joe mentioned earlier, they need to be fed, and bond addition score needs to be either be gaining or being maintained going into the breeding season, because if those cows need to go in calf to secure that milk supply for the next coming year. So I think that's my slides.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Elaine. Some really good insights as to what's happening in milk. Not all positive, as you can see. And look, I think it's about moving to the scenarios that we find ourselves in and the solutions to those to try and get ahead on the milk decline and also in terms of the breeding season that's coming ahead. So, Brian, we'll hand over to yourself. Just before we do that, guys, we're having a technical issue with the questions, the ability to send the questions in. So I'm going to put up a text number on the slides here as we go, and it'll be 087 147 8161. I put it up on the slides as we go here, and if you can text your questions into that, and we'll respond to those. Thanks very much. So Brian, over to you in terms of taking us through some of the scenarios that we're finding out there on the road at the minute, and where farmers are at, and some of the solutions to deliver on that.
Okay, thanks, Shane, and good evening, everyone. So exactly what Shane's after saying there, I'm just going to walk through probably two examples that we're seeing quite a bit coming into us. One is going to be on, say, a low milk proteins, and the other is also going to be on, say, a silage scarcity. So the first scenario we're going to walk through is probably one of the most common calls we're getting at the moment, is a farmer that was out, say, for over the last week, getting out for 4 to 5 hours, and was just managing on some of the drier ground. And up until that, they were doing relatively well. They were getting out for the 5 or 6 hours. The cows were milking around 22 litres. At this stage of the year was pretty good, and with a protein of 3.3 and a 4.2. Now, probably where the queries come into us is in the last few days and even in the last week, say, where cows have been forced inside with grazing conditions. And what farmers are seeing when cows go in and they don't adjust anything apart because they were feeding 4 kilos of concentrate out of grass, and that was sufficient at that time. What we're seeing when the cows go in with no access to grass and they're not moved up in concentrate at that stage and still feeding 4 kilos is a drop both in milk yield and milk protein. And I think Joe done a very good job of explaining why that was. And probably we asked the exact same question of, well, let's firstly work out what is the energy requirement to support the current milk production. So when we flick on to the next slide, that we kind of talked through that there in a bit of detail. Now, we won't go on and deal with the figures too much here because there is a lot of figures on it. But ultimately, the first question we would ask, and we encourage people to work out as well, is what is your actual energy requirement? Say for cows, for your typical Irish cow, she needs about 6 UFL for maintenance. And for every litre she's producing, you need about 0.45 UFL. So when you do all those calculations, 22-litre cow is going to need just under 16 UFL. And when you come down to the bottom left of the screen there, you can see that diet with 6 kilos of grass, dry matter, 8 kilos dry matter of silage. That's what she's getting in at night time, and say the 4 kilos of concentrate. That in that diet alone, that's supplying 16 UFL. That's why the cows were producing quite well when they were outside with the 5 to 6 hours of grass. But when the cows are coming back in, grass is coming out of it, the concentrate is not increasing, and cows ultimately are limited at taking in 12 kilos of dry matter. That diet is only going to support 13.5 UFLs. So it's not even coming close to meeting the energy requirement for 22 litres. So when we just go on to the next slide then, we kind of would look at a range of different solutions, and look, as all the speakers have said, the ideal solution, and it's obviously not an option in all cases here now, but grass is the solution here. So even for where we can get out for 2 or 3 hours, if there's a fine weather window in the evening time, that is the time to be getting out at that stage, because it has such a massive impact on the overall energy intake of the diet. But in some instances, and we are seeing plenty of them unfortunately, where we're seeing temporarily that we're having to house cows fully, we're having to either look at a number of different options. Those options can be anything from sourcing alternative forages that we can feed along with grass silage, such as maize silage. We've had a good few calls about beet. Now, beet is a brilliant, and so many farmers love it, but in these instances, it's a bit like what Joe said. It will take a while to introduce beet to a significant level, because you can't just get in with a big amount of beet very quickly. It needs to be built up slowly. So beet is not always the best option. But look, workload and just facilities and sheds at the moment just dictate that the majority of people are probably going to have to look at additional concentrate. So again, coming back to Joe's point, we're going to have to increase the concentrate up to that between 6 and 8 kilos to support that milk level that we're wanting to produce. And you can see that in the graph down there in the bottom left of your screen there, of when we're feeding our 12 kilos of silage and 7 kilos of concentrate, we're back up on 16.2 UFL, supporting the milk of 22 litres. Now, it is worth noting as well that if cows have been in significant negative energy balance for a prolonged period, they do need to be fed above their maintenance and milk production as well. And that also goes for, say, we get loads of phone calls saying, well, my cows are milking 22 litres and I want them to peak at 26. We really need to be feeding them for 26 to be able to get there, okay? So as we go on to the next slide, we probably see our second most common query at the moment, and it's unfortunately becoming more and more, is shortage of silage on certain farms. The typical call we're getting, if we had to summarize it, is someone who has 10 to 14 days of silage left, would have previously used straw as a buffer, but just unfortunately through availability and quality is not much of an option in places this year. In cases there is limited access to grazing, or in some cases the grazing has taken place and we're already after just burning through a lot of the dry ground, okay? Typically we see these farmers, they're probably active already, so they're already feeding 6 to 7 kilos, and for your typical, and probably more so just for people with, say, weanlings or dry stock, the typical person is feeding 1.5 kilos of concentrate. And a lot of the options are going to be based around, say, yes, there is silage available to be bought, but the quality of it in some cases can be questionable as well. So look, as we begin to look at this solutions then, on that slide. Again, the first solution that we will always look at here is try at any opportunity to get grass in. It's going to take work and it's going to take a lot of effort just getting these 1, 2, 3 hours of grass on certain days into cows when the weather allows, but it's definitely worth it when you look at the examples of the diets that get grass into them. In some of those cases where, say, grass is just not an option, again, you're back to your either purchasing, say, the likes of your silage bales or pit silage in. But again, we probably want to be getting a handle on, say, what quality that is, because we don't want to be replacing, say, 70 DMD silage with maybe a 64 or 65, because we'll end up having to supplement further. And again, if maize silage was available to be bought, an excellent option. Again, beet, we have it in there because we get a lot of inquiries on it, but just people need to know its limitations. You won't be able to get in and out very quickly with that. And again, probably the most common thing that we will see in the short term, because it's flexible and we're able to get in and out with it quickly, is increasing the concentrate to the cows there immediately. Roughly speaking, increasing the concentrate by 1 kilo will save 4 to 5 kilos of silage. For people that, say, don't have the feed space or the time to be able to do midday feeds, we see a lot of these people pushing the parlour feeding to 8.5 kilos. For those people that have got the facilities to be able to get in with a midday feed, soya hulls is ideal in this instance. And because you're splitting the feeds up a little bit, you'd be able to feed, say, 6 kilos in the parlour overall, 3 in the morning, 3 in the evening, and then possibly go to, say, 3.5 kilos of soya hulls in the middle of the day as well. Now, look, a little word of caution with, say, increasing concentrate levels. Cows, in the first example we had, they were being fed 4 kilos. So we do need to just be a little bit conscious. Cows will need to be built a little bit slowly up to that. And we just, because the last thing we want to avoid here is digestive upsets. For the case for weanlings, for either dry stock farmers or for dairy farmers that have a lot of weanlings on hand, again, you can increase the concentrate, whether it's through soya hulls or, say, your type of wean and build product. You can increase that to 3.5 kilos as long as they have access to fodder as well. The limit of where we see the safe level of, say, concentrate inclusion is about 50% of their overall dry matter intake. Where's that in plain man's English? That's about 9 to 10 kilos of concentrate, and at that stage it needs to be split out over the day in equal feeds. So as we just flick on to the next slide, Ailish would have previously covered it, but it's probably worth noting again. The board of Tirlán has decided between the 15th of March and the 6th of April to provide a €30 rebate on all gain dairy feed delivered during this time. The aim of this is ultimately trying to support our milk suppliers during this difficult time with weather, and specifically in around this time when we're heading for peak lactation and fertility. And so, yeah, look, that's pretty much all from me. Shane, I won't just leave some time for questions then.
Yeah, indeed. And thanks for that, Brian. Look, great insights in terms of the solutions that are available there for the various scenarios. Look, it's an endless number of scenarios that are out there, but I think hopefully that's a flavour of some actions that are going to be taken. In fairness to you guys, you're sending in lots of text messages, and just to remind you of the number, it's 087 147 8161 rather than sending the messages in on Teams. And apologies if you have already submitted in on Teams. If you could text us in on 087 147 8161. I'm gonna crack on through these just given the time, and we'll keep it moving. So just in terms of the first question coming in, what height of covers should be skipped and baled for silage when the weather dries up? So good question. Joe, maybe just throw that one to you first. What covers should be skipped and baled for silage? Still with us, Joe?
Unmute, yeah, I'm unmuted, yeah, sorry. Look, that'll depend, I suppose, Shane, on the on the average farm cover as well. So I know from a couple of years back, Ballyhays, who are out grazing by day, by the way, just so we all know that, so that they're not they're out grazing at the moment, putting in 6 kilos of grass into the cows and calving. They would have done a trial a couple of years ago where they kept the cows in really till this time of the year, and then they had to go skip. They had to fix the grass by skipping at the end of the second rotation, if you like. You were ending up, depending on the cover and trying to get the cover back to that 550, 600 farm cover in high growth area, you'll end up skipping covers of there'll be 17 and 1800 kilos in and around that level. So I think you have to base it on the decision on the farm cover. And I think what we have to say there too is, Shane, that probably we won't get to finish the first round on a lot of farms. We won't get to finish the first round, and trying to finish the first round could be a problem because it'll just get away on us a little bit. Okay, so the one thing I would say when the time comes for that, guys, that we don't end up in a situation where we say that's too heavy, I'm going to leave it into first cut silage. That's a mistake. I think sometimes we'd say it's not going to be cut for first, not going to be grazed, so I'm going to roll it into first cut. Not all of it is cut. You're not going to be able to do that with it all. I think the risk I would see coming here is we don't get it grazed. We feel that we're short of silage. We're going to tighten the farm up too much, and we're going to end up going into May, late April, May, with too high of a stocking rate imposed on the platform, right? Stocking up to 4.5, maybe up to 5 cows per hectare. We don't want to be doing that. Okay, so that's a decision we have to make based on the average farm cover. We tidy up the paddocks, but we take them out in rotation as bales, freshen it up, and keep the ground, keep the grass and that area in the mix, if you like, more so than if you get my point. Because the danger, I think, is when we decide I don't get to graze it, so I roll it all into first cut, we'll end up running out of grass twice in the year if that happens. Okay, so but it will be 1800. It'll be roughly 1800, 2000. Don't worry about what's on it. Take it out of it to set up the wedge rather than worrying about how much is on the paddock. Okay.
When you have the microphone there, Joe, I'm gonna just throw you the next question a bit curveball. Should we be more cautious about using sex semen this year with the potential decreased body condition score on cows?
I suppose that's very much it's a herd by herd one. I think if we can get condition held and on the turn, Shane, I think it should be still doable. Most people have the sex semen purchase at this stage. Maybe what we're seeing on farms is that the number of cows that are I don't think we'll drop away from the amount of sex semen that we would use, but we probably might need to take a look at which cows we'd plan to use it on. Again, so take a condition score a couple of weeks before breeding. Some of them that we had in the list for using sex semen, if they're particularly thin, you might switch a different few cows into the mix. But I don't think we should be stepping away from it hugely, But just be careful. I think one quick point possibly that we do need to make, and it's one of the benefits that we've seen from EBI over the years. The higher EBI cow has a great capacity to repair herself when the thing turns, right? And for years and years and years, we've had people trying to fix a fertility problem out of the male bin, but it doesn't work. Yeah. Right? It doesn't work. So, if we have the high fertility genetics in place, we'll be surprised at how quickly those cows can turn the corner. There are certain genotypes or certain breed or certain type of cow out there, if we threw 10 kilos of concentrate at them, they still won't go and calf. Okay, so I think we have to be conscious of that. I think the breeding thing is around the corner in my head, all right, but that's why I think, maybe that midday feed or that sort of higher energy, lower protein thing, we're not looking for massive peaks here. We're looking to hold condition, keep it sensible, and I think we'll be fine if it turns. But it's a fair point. But
that's great, Joe. 2 more. Just probably should have brought the other one on breeding into you. But would you consider would you consider, this is from Joe in Wexford, would you consider delaying the start of breeding this year? And there's no name on this one, but it's going to once a day milking, an option to reduce grass silage and concentrate requirements for the cows, but obviously there could be a milk impact there.
Two things, right? First thing on the once a day milking, it's a great question. All of the work done previously, we all have this 20% in our head about 20% in our head about once a day milking. So we go to once a day milking, we lose 20% milk yield, and the cows hold on to the condition. That's what the good book says, right? But and all of the work done on once a day milking, every trial that was ever done on that kept the diet the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a few trials have tried to save feed and go once a day milking, if you know what I'm saying. So trying to save feed and go once a day milking at the same time, you're going to lose 30%. You lose 30% of milk.
Yeah.
Too much.
Yeah, and God knows what you lose next year.
Yeah, and on the other one, then I think it's a question we could have anyway about calving date. You know, it's a question we could have at the start of calving date anyway, particularly as 6-week calving rates have increased and maybe stocking rates have increased. You know, on a normal year, we could be having this webinar saying people are running out of grass if they're starting to calve too early. So, you know, I think we look at that, you say, where's your normal? I wouldn't overreact to a wet year. I would more react to a grass budget over the course of a couple of years. Talk to your advisor on that. If it's something that you're saying, I'm always tight, maybe I'm going too early or going too fast on my first third on the farm, it's something worth thinking about. But you're probably talking about playing with calving date by plus or minus a week, I would say. But it's not to say we're delaying the end of breeding. We're sort of delaying the start of breeding, but still going very fast through it. But I wouldn't react to. I wouldn't react to a bad year by changing calving date. But I would look at my grass budget over time and see, am I? For a lot of farms, calving in January is too early. Like, or end of January is still too early. You know.
Yeah. What's the system that suits the farm?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
The heavy farms and so on. Elaine, a couple for you. I'm going to roll them together. There's an awful lot of questions coming in. Keep them coming, guys. We'll keep the webinar going as long as the questions coming in. So a couple questions, Elaine. Milk urea in the bulk tank has been increasing and has gone from 29 to 38 in the last week. Is that an issue before breeding season, and what can I do to correct it if it's a problem? The second one then is what if the majority of my herd have peaked? So somebody's concerned about milk volumes. Now that's fair concern if the herd is peaked at this stage, but is there a point in trying to feed harder at this stage? I would think so, but just on the milk urea rising and then the herd having peaked.
Yeah, in terms of milk ureas, so that might give an indication that you're actually getting out to grass, which is great because of the higher protein in grass. I wouldn't be too concerned, ideally you want to be between 20 and 30. Slightly above that is not going to do too much harm, but it's usually if your proteins are low and your milk ureas are high, that's an indicator that, again, there's not enough energy in the diet to be able to make use and utilize the protein in the diet. In terms of, so you've already reached peak, is there any point of feeding on? It depends on what condition your cows are in, and you still have those late calvers that can also still manage to reach that peak if we get to grass. But yeah, still feeding if you need to increase body nutrition score or maintain body nutrition score, depending on whether you're getting out to grass or you're on silage. So prepping the cow for breeding is going to be important, so you have those milk yields and milk supply next year.
100%, Elaine. I would have thought it's early for peak yet, isn't it? Like, I mean, typically we're talking May, but you know, individual farms are different. But I think, could it be a false peak? The last couple of collections you've just leveled out, and it's a matter of driving it on and trying to get the cows well fed, I think, isn't it?
Well, it depends just when. So those cows that were calved maybe back in January, kind of early February, are peaking at the moment or have peaked. But those anytime from mid-February on, they still have a few weeks to still peak.
Brian, thanks very much, Elaine. Brian, a question for you there on covers. So covers, no name on this one. Covers of 800 kilos on first grazed paddocks, 72% grazed. Wet ground too wet to go near. Should we hold cows inside or start second round now on the dry ground? Average farm cover 750 kilos. Good question, in fairness.
Yeah, I would still try. Look, obviously, there's a critical level you don't want to go below for average farm cover, and you're still no problem there. So I would still try and maintain that some grass in the diet the whole time. For what it's doing for you nutritionally, there's going to be way too big of a benefit to ignore it. And as well as that, look, when it does dry up, you're going to dry up very quickly, hopefully, and a lot of that grass that is, say, now ungrazable, you'll be able to get access to it very quickly. So you don't want a situation where you're after staying in now just to avoid going on to some of the second rotation, and then all of a sudden you have too much grass. So I would still say keep it. There's a limit to where you go to, but you'd still want to maintain some level of grass. And this is a changing feed the whole time. Seeing growth at the moment, and we're seeing grass kick on there as well. So when it does dry up, it will kick on very quickly.
Yeah, it'll jump very quick. Another one, Brian, I'll give it to you. John in Kildare, what's the max they can feed in the parlour? Cows are milking 28 litres at the minute. Is it okay to feed 8 kilos? He's currently on 6 kilos, but his protein is dropping. Can he feed 8 kilos?
Yeah, there's no problem, and there's loads of people feeding 8.5 kilos in the parlour. Probably the limiting factor for some people going beyond 8 kilos, apart from nutritionally, is just time. Cows will struggle to eat 4 kilos in a 4.5 kilos at times in a sitting. Now, it just depends on how quickly they're moving through the parlour. We have seen many times in the past people getting 5.5 kilos into cows in a sitting. So it's just very dependent. I'd very much keep an eye on the individual situation, but absolutely no problem at all.
Joe, do you want to come in on that? Oh,
yeah, sorry. I just think we have to be careful too that, you know, with all the discussion here, the objective is to start getting people back out, right? I do believe, I'm going to be shot for this one, but I do believe some of us are being overcautious. And I can hear it being said, but there was a comment passed to me today by a guy who's out grazing, and you know, it's not ideal and not pretty, but he says some people just aren't used to the hardship, right? And I think that's a dangerous comment to make, right? And I'm sitting here saying I know the story, right? But I just think I'd be a bit concerned that what we're going to do is focus very heavily on rates of concentrate, how much can we feed, what's the maximum we can feed, and then we're going to spend our time building up to that level and then taking too long to come back down from it. Okay, yeah. I think we have to be clear and careful. Cows have to be well fed, they have to be covered for their body condition. We're not going to get any prizes for the milk we're going to produce over the next week or 10 days. But I'd agree, you know, we have to feed them and we have to make sure that's done and correct. But at the same time, and you know, maybe just to come in where you're at there, Brian, you know, we hold them and we keep them right and keep, as you said yourself, keep the digestive system right. But you know, in a way, we're probably, I would look at it differently to say, for example, if I was back in November and I was going to set up a diet for the next 120 days to try and push on cows indoors and I knew they were going to be settled. That's a different situation than where we're at now. We're talking about, hopefully, it's a week sort of a thing and trying to get maybe a couple of dry days to get cows out. We need to be careful around what we do with digestive issues as well. That's why I would be thinking something like you said yourself there, Brian, about, you know, the hulls or something like that. It's a kind of a stable and a simple feed. It's not going to cause too many issues. We need to be thinking about filling the cow as well as feeding the cow in a way, you know. And just one maybe quick point coming back on what you're talking about, Elaine. To me, the biggest risk around production is not going to be the peak issue. It's actually going to be pasture quality through May and June. Because every time we see this happen, right, and we've done this work ourselves over the years. We've driven peak to 35 litres using concentrate. And if pasture quality is poor in May and June and July, we don't get any benefit from driving a high peak. It actually falls away. So the issue will be managing the end of the first grazing round, managing quality into the second round. And I think the risk at farm level is trying to close too much ground to make silage and leaving ourselves tight for grass coming into May and June. So while I am agreeing fully with the idea of feeding the cow, be careful what we do in the second and third grazing round, because we could spend a lot of money building up to a high peak now, and we could lose it all by making bad decisions on grazing in 6 weeks' time. Okay, so just to make that point on it. So yeah, our work is not done if we hold the cows together for this couple of weeks. The grazing management decisions in a month's time will probably have a bigger effect on annual production, I would say.
Yeah, and to that end, Joe, we will do another webinar, or possibly 2 more of them, in terms of in the coming weeks. Look, there's the immediate pieces to get through this now, get through this very bad weather and very wet, waterlogged ground. Getting the grass into the cows has to be the ultimate aim here. And look, we do what we can, but some people are fairly challenged in that one. Joe, just one for you here, just in terms of alternative feeds. Does it make sense to feed palm kernel 50-50 with silage when cows are in, to maximize intakes and spare silage? And that same person had another question, but it's an overlap with the previous one. So just the palm kernel.
It's a similar idea. It's a similar idea, I suppose, than the hulls and the than the hulls or the beet pulp. I suppose our preference probably at the moment would be probably for the hulls, to be honest. But it's the same idea, high fiber, not a true concentrate, let's put it that way, but it's sort of an intermediate filler that's easy to use. It can be used. It has worked in the past. It would work. I know we have other issues with it, and there's issues around the sustainability question on it and all the rest of it. Also with the protein levels in it as well. But look, it can be fed. I suppose we would be probably looking at possibly the hulls being the weapon of choice just for the moment, I would say.
Yeah. And we would often find as well, they're just on the palm kernel, specifically at this stage in lactation, where digestive upsets can happen quite easily. It's not very palatable at times. Cows will slowly get an appetite for it, but it's very much going back to Joe's point. It's trying to be flexible with getting in with something that the cows are going to take and not cause a digestive upset. And there's a limited amount of palm kernel that can be really fed as well, and that's around 3 kilos max.
Yeah, and that's probably beyond the 50-50. So as in 50-50, way beyond that. So 3 kilos max is the key piece. Elaine, one for you. Feeding 7.5 kilos a meal. Protein is 3.3. They don't give their EBI or cow type or anything like that, but protein is 3.3. Silage getting very tight. How much extra fodder stretcher can I feed to spare silage?
Well, if they're already feeding 7 kgs, I suppose it's similar to the question that Brian got earlier. It's kind of limited in the amount that you can increase if you're feeding in the parlour. So I suppose the midday feed comes in there if once it goes above the 8 kg. So your soya hulls or whatever can be fed then. In the mid feed can be 2-3 kgs up to 4 kgs if needs to be. But again, it comes down to Joe's point earlier about increasing those levels over a short period of time, and it could change in the next few days too.
Yeah, and they didn't mention it, but obviously grass is not an option where they have all the dry paddocks grazed. But if there's any option of on-off for a couple of hours to try and get a bit grass into them, would be great. Elaine, stay with you. Will bale or wagon silage give better protein levels than precision cut pit silage? Because it depends on what the wagon silage and the bale silage was made from, but
yeah, it'll all depend on the DMD of that silage quality. So usually if it's high quality silage, probably wagon or precision chop can increase the dry matter intakes. But it all depends on dry matter and quality of that silage.
And what we would see also at times like this, when people say if they are running out of concentrate, it's a bit it's trying to keep the gut full as well. So we would often find that, say, some of the bale silage or wagon silage has a better gut fill capacity than your precision chop silage, to again just avoid the digestive upsets when you are pushing the limits of concentrate intake if it needs to be.
Second question in from someone else there. Does zero grass, Brian, I'll stay with you. Does zero grazed grass from strong covers have the same nutritional value as grazed grass?
Whether yes, ultimately, if we're talking, say, a cover of 2,000, whether there's zero graze in it, it's grand. But probably the bigger issue I'd have with, say, zero grazed grass at this time is that still could only be, say, 12-13% dry matter at times, depending on when you're cutting it. It's again hard to get the intakes into them. But again, look, we see plenty of people at it. It is a good option, but I don't see too many fields where you travel with a zero grazer today.
Yeah, 100%. Another question on once a day, but Joe's covered it there in fairness. So Jim in Tipperary, I'm running short on silage, and I can buy beet for dairy cows. how much can I feed when I get it? Brian, you covered that, I think, before.
Yeah, you do need to introduce this slowly, and Joe will come in here now as well, because he'll be used to setting up winter diets and this. But like ultimately, you'll be starting at 3 to 4 kilos fresh weight and building it up slowly. Where we'd set a lot of winter diets up is say 10 to 12 kilos fresh weight of beet going in there, a nice safe level, not pushing anything over the limits, but it will take you about a week to get there. And again, it's that point that say you could go away, buy a heap of beet now, and if the weather comes good in a week's time, you're taking a week to get up to a decent level of beet, and now all of a sudden you're out of grass and you're left with beet, and again you're going to have to feed it at some stage.
James in Cork, Joe, one for you. I haven't grazed anything yet and won't be able to for at least a week. The farm has lots of grass on it. Should I take paddocks out when it does dry up? And I think that's a future question, but
yeah, it's a similar thing. It's a similar thing than we talked about, Shane. That the priority there will be get started, and the decision when to take paddocks out will happen in a couple of weeks' time, just to get the rotation going. Mm-hmm. Again, just to emphasize, it's not a case of at some end of the thing you won't get to finish the first round, but you shouldn't roll it into the first cut. You should take it out as paddocks and have it coming back as aftergrass, essentially after the into the second grazing round. But look at lads, the thing is that I keep saying it, it'll want to be bad now to say that you won't be. Nobody can sit here and say that it'll be at least a week. It's honestly, I'm not trying to be smart or trying to be awkward here, but
the sun shines.
3 days could do a lot, right? And I think, the decision can't be made in the yard, and I don't think we should say the decision is made tonight. You think about, look at where the costs are at farm level at the moment. Look where the costs are. I know we talk about milk price maybe doing something a bit positive over the last few months, but look at where our cost structure is at the minute on farms. There's a lot of stuff to be thought about there. We have to be thinking the best economic decision we can be making is say, rather than me waiting a week to go grazing, if we can get out in 3 days' time. I know the forecast is poor, but I'm saying don't put a limit on it and say, there's that we can't go out for a week. We could be out by Saturday, depending on what happens, and we have to keep that priority in up front, because look where feed costs are at the moment on a total basis. It's not pretty. And the decisions we'll make over the next couple of weeks will make a big change there. So I have sympathy for people who say that they can't get out. I'm well used to it. I know the story about wet ground and all the rest of it. But at the same time, don't draw a line and say, right, there's nothing happening for a week. You could be out by Saturday. You don't know. So keep looking.
Not to keep a fixed mind on it.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. Well, you have the microphone there, Joe. Guy has a 16% nut in the bin and won't be able to get to grass for at least a week. Is there a need to change to higher protein nut, or is there any way of increasing the protein in the diet? Is there soya? Can you feed soya and top dress it?
You could if you wanted, but it would be small. Look, the way we would always look at this, that a 10 in the concentrate, a small amount of soya turns a 16 to an 18 very quickly, right? You probably stick to where you are on your concentrate spec. The best thing you do is the same as all these things, right? As soon as you order an 18, it'll stop raining. So maybe go, if you order an 18 and set the whole thing up, it'll stop raining, and then you'll have an 18 in the bin. I would stick with what you have. Stick there. If you have to top it up with something, a small amount, depending on the herd size and what's practical, but a quarter of a kilo of soya would turn, or 0.3 or 0.4, a small amount of soya will turn a 16 into an 18 very quickly, if so needed. So I wouldn't be changing, because I'm sure as night follows day, you order 10 ton of an 18 and suddenly you'll be back out again. So I'm an optimist, believe it or not, Shane. I think the thing can turn fairly quickly, So I think in these situations, right? We've been here before. It's not pretty, but as I say, it's something that we have to sort of push our way through. The diet, no matter what diet we feed over the next few days, it's not going to be ideal for a lot of people. We're out of good silage. We have a 16 in the bin. We're looking to get out to do a bit of grazing. We have to keep the emphasis on keeping the cows healthy and keeping the condition on them. We might end up not being exactly right on paper, but as long as the herd is well fed and comfortable and we're able to manage ourselves and we're not running around the yard carrying buckets here and there, that's important too, right? So keep it settled a wee bit, and don't be aiming for perfection on some of these things. Just one quick point, and I know I'm saying too much here, but you mentioned the once a day. It was just something that I came across there today. Actually, a farmer in Tipperary I was talking to, who's actually really struggling with the whole pressure of the whole situation, right? And it's not simple, and I get it. You're coming out of pretty much calving is nearly done. You're knackered, the whole thing is on top of you, right? This was a young enough chap, and he wasn't starting his evening milking until nearly 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening. And he wasn't finished any evening until 8 o'clock as a result of that. Like, I'm telling him, not once a day, but certainly come back, and if on days like this when the thing is annoying you, come back and start milking at 3:30. Take the pressure off yourself a little bit, right? The routine is too long and too arduous and too horrible at the moment to still be in the yard at 9 o'clock tonight. Okay, so you can do an awful lot with milking interval. You can come back to an 8-hour milking interval, lose no milk, and get a bit of sanity back in your own head, right? So I think clusters on, lads, by 3:30, if you have to give yourself a bit of a chance, because that's the biggest worry I have for a lot of this thing, is actually people are just sick of it at the moment. So milking time is a huge benefit around that shit.
It's relentless, and maybe still some cows to calve, and a lot going on in the yard at the minute. So just as you say, milk earlier, try and get finished up earlier. Give yourself get the break. Get the break. Yeah. Just to call out, guys. We're on the last question here. So if anyone has another question, 087 147 8161. Conscious that number hasn't been on the screen for a bit. This is not a dairy cow question, but it's still very relevant. It resumes from a dairy farmer. I have a shed full of weanlings at the out farm, and I'll be out of silage in a week. Is buying silage or nuts better value? I've increased the ration from 1 kilo to 2 kilos in the last week. Elaine?
Well, it all depends on what silage is available, the quality of it. So,
yeah.
And again, sure, the weather can change. If we're all taking Joe's positivity in the next 3 or 4 days, that hopefully get those weanlings out. But in the short term, well, it depends on ground conditions. If silage is available and you know the quality, then maybe it's worth having those extra bales in the yard even for later on. And if it is poor quality and not of it, then the concentrates is the other option. But maybe the bales is the better option. At least you have it in the yard then.
Yeah, it's probably a mix of both situations, really. It's probably a blend of slightly increasing concentrate and also say buying silage as well. Like, it's just to be practical, like.
Yeah, bit of a combination. Guys, thanks very much for all your answers to all your questions. Thanks to everyone for sending the questions. Just one, somebody texted in, hello, how are things? Just wondering if you have any maize, ? Hungry moo, hashtag hungry moo. So I don't personally, but I know if you talk to the branch or business manager, we'll do our best to help you out. Look, guys, thanks very much, and for everyone who texted in their questions and interacted. Look, thank everyone for joining, and to all our speakers. Look, for the questions that came in that we didn't get to, there was a couple of duplicate questions, and we'll go back to those. And look, hope everybody's got some useful tips from the webinar this evening, and will be able to use the guidance on your own farms in the coming days. And look, I think it's keep the head up as well. Keep it as simple as you can. Just try and get the grass into them. I know it's not simple, but shorten that day if it's possible. To Joe's point there, just from the labour side of it, and just keep things as simple as possible. There's a lot going on in the yard at the minute. Every farm's different, guys. There's bespoke solutions needed on individual farms, and everyone has their own scenarios and their own options available to them. So look, get in touch with the local Tirlán branch or business manager and be able to work through the solutions for your farm. So look, just to finish it up this evening, thanks to everyone for joining and participating, and to our speakers, Elaine, Brian and Joe Patton, Head of Knowledge Transfer, and Teagasc for his inputs, and also to John and Caroline who've been working on this in the background, and thanks to everyone who's helped to deliver the webinar for us. Thanks for joining us this evening. See you at the next one very soon, and safe farming. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.